Let's talk about the students with emotional and behavioral disability. Are those who display chronic, significant problems with their feelings, mood, or conduct that negatively affect their academic performance. And at the end of this topic, we are able to differentiate adaptive and maladaptive behavior, characteristics and definitions of emotional and behavioral disorders, influencing the development of emotional and behavioral disorders. So we have the concept of personality development, the adaptive and maladaptive behavior. Adaptive behavior is when a person acts in ways that lead to positive results for them, helping them grow, fulfilled, and reach their potential. The term well-being means that the person works together towards growth and actualization, which in turn benefits the entire group. Maladaptive behavioral if they result to negative and undesirable consequences and interferes with the person's optimal functioning and growth. The use of the term maladaptive rather than abnormal puts the focus on behavior rather than the person, thereby implying the possibility for improvement. We have also the pattern of personality development. First one is the dependence to self-direction. This describes the natural human progression from total dependence to self-direction. Initially, a fetus and newborn rely completely on their mother and family for all needs. This dependence gradually lessens as the child grows, culminating when the toddler starts actively exploring the world and acting independently. This shift marked the beginning of their journey towards self-sufficiency. For example, a newborn baby is entirely dependent on a caregiver to be fed, change, and move. They cannot perform any of these actions for themselves. The second one is the pleasure to reality and self-control. The pleasure principle is the impulsive, instinctual drive to seek immediate gratification of all desires, needs, and urge while avoiding pain. It is the ruling force in the mind of a young child. The reality principle emerges as the ego develops, compromise, or even abandon desires based on the constraint of the real words and the consequence of actions. For example, a child operating on the pleasure principle might want a toy they see in the store right now and throw a tantrum if they can't have it immediately, whereas an older person operating under the reality principle knows they must wait until their next payday to purchase the item or save money for it, recognizing the financial reality. The third one is the ignorance to knowledge. And a simple explanation, babies aren't blank slates at birth. They come equipped with inborn reflexes and instinct that help them survive and immediately begin the rapid process of learning about their bodies and environment during the first 2 years. For example, a clear example is the sucking reflex. When an infant mouth is touched, they automatically start sucking, which is an instinctive behavior vital for the feeding and survival right from birth. The next pattern is the incompetence to competence. This pattern describes human development as a lifelong journey where an individual gradually transitions from being incompetent or unable to do things at birth to becoming a competent adult, mastering the necessary intellectual, emotional, and social skills. It is a process of maturation. As children grow, they learn to think, manage their feelings, interact with others, and handles life demand. The fifth one is the diffuse of articulated self-identity. So this concept describes the developmental process where a person's self-identity evolves from an initially diffuse, which is unclear, mixed in with the environment, state in fantasy to articulated, which is the clear, distinct, and well-defined. For example, when an infant realizes that the face looking back from the mirror is their own, not just another object, they are moving toward an articulated self-identity as an individual separate from their environment. And the last pattern of personality development is the amoral to moral. Children transition from being amoral or lacking a concept of right and wrong to amoral by internalizing rules about acceptable behavior. This learning happens when a children realize that good behavior like sharing a toy, moral, are usually praised and lead to positive outcomes, and bad behaviors like hitting result disapproval or consequences. Let's move on to the definition of emotional and behavioral disorder. Disordered behavior is a social contract. There is no clear agreement as to the criteria and parameters of normal adaptive behavior and good mental health. Next is different theories of emotional disturbance use concept and terminology that do not present a clear meaning of the condition. The third one is measuring and interpreting disordered behavior across time and setting is a difficult, exact, and costly endeavor. Number four, the cultural influence. Expectation and forms across ethnic and cultural groups are often quite different. The fifth one is frequency and intensity of disordered behavior is difficult to measure and control in view of the fact that children behave inappropriately at times. And the last one, disordered behavior sometimes occurs in conjunction with other disabilities such as mental retardation and learning disabilities. Definition that had the most impact on special education in the United States was written by the Ali Power in 1957, June 2002. However, Power's definition was criticized for its vagueness and subjectivity. Special education teachers asked for more specific indicators of satisfactory, normal, inappropriate, and pervasive interpersonal relationship. There are three factors were considered in determining if a child is emotionally disturbed, which is the intensity, pattern, and duration. For intensity, this describes how severe or strong the child's problem behavior or emotional reaction is when it happens. For pattern, this refers to the predictable schedule or specific situations like every morning or only at school and in which the child problem behavior usually occurs. And for the duration, the sample states for how long, example, 3 weeks, 6 months, and the child has been exhibiting the specific problem. And now, let's move on to the IDA or definitions of serious emotional disturbance, Harvard 2003, or Individuals Disability Education Act. The Public on Special Education in America defines serious emotional disturbance as a condition exhibiting one or more of the following characteristics over a long period of time or chronicity and to a marked degree, severity, which adversely affect educational performance or difficulty in school. For letter A, an inability to learn which cannot be explained by intellectual, sensory, and health factors. It means a child is struggling to learn things in a typical way, but their difficulty isn't caused by low intelligence because they are smart. For vision or hearing, but their senses work fine, or a medical condition, but they are generally healthy. So, example, a student has trouble reading words accurately, even though they have a high IQ and pass all their eyes and ear exam, which suggests they may have dyslexia, a type of SLD. So, for letter B, an inability to build or maintain satisfactory interpersonal relationship with peers and teachers. It means a student has persistent difficulty making friends, keeping those friendship, or getting along with their classmates and teachers. For example, a student frequently argues with peers during group activities and often lashes out at a teacher when given corrective feedback, showing an inability to maintain satisfactory relationship. And for letter C, inappropriate types of behavior or feelings, their normal circumstances. So this phrase generally refers to responses, actions, or emotions that don't fit an expected or typical way a person would react in an ordinary situation. For letter D, a general pervasive mode of unhappiness or depression. This phrase describes a state where a person's sadness or depressed feeling is deep, widespread, and lasts for a very long time. It's not just a passing bad mood. It's an emotion that affects nearly every part of their daily life and doesn't fit easily. For example, even on sunny days or during enjoyable family gatherings, she maintains a general pervasive mode of unhappiness or depression, showing little interest or joy in anything. And for the last one, a tendency to develop physical symptoms or fears associated with personal or school problems. So this phrase describes how stress, anxiety, or emotional difficulties related to one's personal life or school can start showing up as actual body symptoms like headache or stomach ache, or as instance irrational fears or phobias. It's essentially the mind's emotional problems manifesting physically or as overwhelming anxiety about common situations. And this time, let's move on to the CCBD or definitions of emotional and behavioral disorders, Harvard 2003 or Council for Children with Behavioral Disorder. Behavioral or emotional responses in school programs so different from appropriate age, cultural, or ethnic norms that they adversely affect educational performance. Educational performance include the development and demonstrations of academic, social, and vocational and personal skills, such as more than a temporary, expected response to stressful events in the environment, consistently exhibited in two different settings, at least one of which is school-related and is unresponsive to direct intervention in general education, or the child's condition is such that general education intervention will be difficult. This disability are used to determine if a child's struggles are significant enough and long-lasting enough to qualify as a disability needing special education services, rather than just a typical temporary problem. In short, the child's issue is not a quick fix, it's a problem that more serious just being upset about a bad day or a stressful week. It's a prolonged, unusual response and happening everywhere. The problem is consistent and clearly visible in at least two major parts of the child's life, and one of those must be the school and environment. Also needs specialized help as standard teaching methods and interventions in the regular classroom haven't worked to fix the problem, or the child's condition is so severe that trying general methods will be pointless. Emotional and behavioral disorders can coexist with other disabilities. This category may include children or youth with schizophrenic disorders, affective disorders, anxiety disorders, or other sustained disturbances of conduct or adjustment when they adversely affect educational performance in accordance with section. Additional factors are considered in assessing a child who is suspected to be emotionally disturbed, or Harvard 2003, the rate and the latency. For rate refers to the frequency of occurrence of behavior for standard unit of time. For example, the stands up 6 times every 10 minutes, and for the latency refers to the time that elapses between the opportunity to respond and the beginning of the behavior.
The classification of emotional and behavioral disorders. Emotional and behavioral disorders fall under four systems of classification. First, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, DSM-4, classification published by the American Psychiatric Association 1994. Second, we have the Quays Statistical Classification. Third, the classification derived from direct observation and measurement. And last, the classification based on the degree of severity. So, on the first one, there are three criteria that must be met in determining the presence of emotional and behavioral disorders, particularly among adults. So, we have the person experience significant pain or distress and inability to work or play. So, for example, a person with major depression may experience a constant low mood and a loss of interest in activities they once enjoyed, leading to a significant inability to function at work or in social situations. So for the next one, we have the problem source lies within the person and is not a normal response to life events. So for example, a person with schizophrenia may experience hallucinations and delusions, which are linked to biological factors like brain chemistry imbalances and are not a normal or expected response to life events. Okay, for the third criteria, we have the problem is not a deliberate reaction to societal conditions. So, for example, individuals with ASPD or antisocial personality disorder may not follow socially accepted norms or rules and may cause harm to others. This behavior is a persistent pattern of disrespect and disregard for others, not a deliberate reaction to a specific conflict like government policy or prejudice. So for the next classification, we have the Quays definition. So in Quays definition, they gather data on hundreds of children. The statistical data revealed four clusters of traits and behaviors among children with emotional and behavioral disorders. The following are the four clusters of traits and behaviors among children. First, we have the conduct disorder, which is characterized by disobedience, being disruptive, getting into fights, being bossy, and temper tantrums. Then we have anxiety withdrawals, sometimes called anxiety disorder. So, third is immaturity shows in short attention span, extreme passivity, daydreaming, preference for younger playmates, and clumsiness. Then the last one is socialized aggression is marked by truancy, gang membership, theft, and feeling of pride and belonging to a delinquent subculture. So for the next classification, we have the direct observation and measurement, wherein five dimensions of the child's display of the disordered behaviors are observed, measured, and analyzed. So here are the five dimensions: frequency, duration, topography, magnitude, and stimulus control. So for the frequency, it indicates the rate at which the behavior occur and how often a particular behavior is performed. So, for example, a child shouts no 20 times during a 1 hour class period. So, next is duration, wherein a measure of the length and amount of time a child exhibits disordered behavior. So, for example, a child cries for 20 minutes every time they are asked to do their assignments. So the next one is topography, which refers to the physical shape or form of behavior. So for example, a child's tantrum involves throwing themselves on the floor, kicking their feet, and clenching their fists. Next is the magnitude, which refers to the intensity of the displayed behavior. So for example, when asked to stop playing, a child might lightly tap a table on some occasions, but on others, they might hit the table with significant force. Last is the stimulus control, which refers to the inability to select an appropriate response to a stimulus. So, for example, a child only says hi when prompted by a staff member saying say hi. They never initiate the greeting on their own. The staff member's prompt is the stimulus controlling the behavior. So, the last one, we have the degree of severity. This indicates that the emotional and behavioral disorders can be mild and severe. So, for the mild level, they respond positively to the therapy. They can also attend regular classes. While in severe level or degree, they require intense treatment and intervention. Now, we'll be talking about the etiological factors and cause of emotional and behavioral disorders. We have biological factors, wherein authorities believe that all children are born with a biological determined temperament. The inborn temperament may not directly cause a behavior problem to occur but may predispose the child to behavior disturbances. So, for example, a baby who is very sensitive to noise and touch might startle easily and avoid new places. On its own, this trait is neutral, but in busy settings, it can lead to frustration and tantrums unless adults help the child feel safe and prepared. So, for the environmental factors, we have two: home and family influences and school experiences. So, for the home and family influences, the relationship that a child has with the parents during the early years is critical to the way he learns to behave. So, for example, when parents talk, play, and set clear limits, children pick up positive habits. Early relationships at home guide how a child learns to behave with others. So, school experiences. There are experiences in school where children spend a large part of the day that can precipitate the occurrence of behavior problems. School settings can spark behavior problems. A child who is the center of attention at home now shares one adult with many classmates and may act out to be noticed. Without careful support, everyday classroom patterns can keep these behaviors going despite the teacher's best effort. Next is the characteristics of children and youth with emotional and behavioral disorders. So, intelligence, intellectual characteristics, and academic achievement research on American children with emotional and behavioral disorders shows that while their average IQ is slightly below the norm, many perform better when supported through regular classes and special education. However, they still face serious academic challenges. So, as you can see, there are two-thirds that could not pass competency examinations for their grade level, 44% of which failed one or more courses. They also have high absenteeism rate than any other disability, missing average of 18 days per school year. 48% drop out of high school and over 50% are unemployed. So social skills and interpersonal relationship. So this tackles about how students with emotional and behavioral disorders often have trouble forming and keeping good relationships with others. It says that these difficulties can start as early as childhood and can go through adolescence and adulthood. This highlights the long-term challenge these students face in developing social skills and maintaining healthy interpersonal relationships throughout their lives. Antisocial behavior, a pattern of frequent rule breaking and the harmful actions toward people or property. This behavior shows little respect for family expectations, community rules, and laws. So, for example, aggression, vandalism, theft, and verbal abuse. So, opposition defiant disorder or ODD. As the name implies, students or individuals with opposition defiant disorder consistently goes against, oppose, defy, and show hostility towards the author. So, the following are the symptoms of someone who has ODD: often loses one's temper, often argues with adults' requests or rules, often actively defies or refuses to comply with adults' requests or rules, often deliberately annoys people, often blames others for one's mistake or misbehavior, often touchy or easily annoyed by others, often angry and resentful, and lastly, often spiteful and vindictive. Externalizing and internalizing behavioral disorder. So the first one is internalizing behavioral disorder. Some children with emotional and behavioral disorder display externalizing behavior. So they show it. So for example, out of set behavior, making unnecessary noise, truancy or absent without a valid reason, constant talking to self and others, disobedience, and attention, persistent lying, and constant blaming of others. So that's externalizing behavior. For internalizing behavior, this highlights that when children do not get enough interaction, it can hinder their development. It also mentions that internalizing behavioral disorder and mental or emotional conflicts may not be obvious to others. They can go unnoticed because the symptoms are inwards rather than outwards. Aggressive and violent behaviors encompasses a range of actions intended to cause harm, either physical or psychological, to another person, animal, or property. Violence is an extreme form of physical aggression. So, for example, we have assault, using weapon, threatening, and name calling.
Delicacy refers to behaviors like aggression, rule breaking, or conflicts with authority, often linked to unmet emotional needs or environmental factors. Why there is assessment tools. Its purpose to pinpoint the why behind behaviors and guide interventions. Assessment tools. Oh, observations, behavior checklists, and interviews. Observations by teachers or parents track behavior patterns in different settings, example, classroom versus home. Behavior checklists, example, BASC3 and CBCL. Standards tools to rate behaviors, example, hyperactivity, withdrawal. Interviews gathers insights from students, families, or counselors about triggers or stressors. And lastly, functional behavior assessment or FBA. It identifies triggers, example loud noises, behaviors, example heating, and consequences, example escaping a task. The goal of these tools are to create a plan to replace harmful behaviors with positive alternatives. Approaches. Number one, applied behavior analysis or ABA to teaching social skills. Number three, alternative responses. Number four, self management.
Interventions to reduce behavior problems. Clear rules, routines, and visual schedules break tasks into small steps to avoid frustration. De-escalation using calm techniques, examples breathing. Collaboration, work with parents, counselors, and therapists for consistency. Positive behavior support or PBIS.
Goal: create a structured, support environment to help students succeed emotionally and academically.